Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 167. We are in the week entering into Chodesh Taamuz, which will be next Shabbos and Sunday, as well as Parshas Korach. So, as is customary, living with the times, and as the Rebbe did in virtually every Farbrengen, would talk about the Parsha or the events of that period in time based on the principle, firstly what the Alter Rebbe said, to live with the times, which means to live with the Torah that we read those times, as well as the concept, especially when it comes to holidays, which means these days we remember them and we recreate them, as the Arizal explains, because time in Judaism is like a spiral. It's not like a river of time linear, it's a spiral which comes back on a cycle. At every point in time, it returns to that axis on a different plane. So that's why birthdays are so significant. We're not just remembering when you were born years ago, but actually that moment in time, that day of birth, returns to that same place. So the energy, time being energy, returns to that point in energy. In the words of the Zohar, Kol Yema V'Yema Ovid Avidite. Every day has its function. In explaining the pasuk in Chumash, which seems to be missing a letter, which says, Sheishis Yomim Osa Hashem Elokim Hashemayim V'Sa'aretz. 6 days God created heaven and earth. As the Zohar, it should have said in 6 days, during 6 days, B'Sheishis Yomim. So the Zohar answers, Sheishis Yomim, because God created the Sheishis Yomim themselves. Each day is also creation. He created 6 days, 6 energies, as we know, that you have Sundays corresponds to Chesed, to love, Monday to Gvura, Tuesday to Teferes, Wednesday to Netzach, Thursday to Hoid, and Friday to Yesod, and of course Shabbos Malchus, you have the Melech Malchus. So each day has its energy. That's the days of the week. The same as with days of the month, the same as with annual events like Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur and Sukkot and Pesach, Shavuos, and so on. So time is that type of cycle or spiral rather than cycle, because it's not exactly, it's the same point, but at a different plane, as I mentioned. So as such, time has that power. So when we're in this particular part of the year, now reading Parsha Korach, as well as going into the Chodesh Taamuz, the beginning of the new month of Taamuz, those events that happened and that happened the first time, the energy of that time is recreated and renewed as we experience it now, which of course gives us a whole different way of looking at our lives. That life is not just one boring monotonous flow, but every moment is renewed. Every moment has its energy. Every moment has its adventure, you can say. So if you're able to tap into that and think of it that way, our job is to align ourselves. We're going to align ourselves with the energy of the moment, or the energy of the day, or the week, or the month, of the year. Then you have yourself a opportunity every given moment to excavate and draw from that energy into our lives. So what is the energy of this week? And this, of course, in the context of Chassidus Applied, is relevant because all of us are traveling through time. We are human beings that live in space, time, and soul, Elam, Shan, and Nefesh, or even modern science puts it in terms of man, time, space, and man, or time, space, and soul, is the way we would put it, Elam, Shan, and Nefesh. So we are occupying this time, and this space, and this time. So what is the energy of the time? So something in Parsha Korach and Chodesh Taamuz, we'll talk about that. There are obviously many, many different lessons and many different points that were made throughout the teachings of Chassidus, and especially in the Rebbe's talks. So I'll talk about one, Korach, being that Korach comes right after Shlach, which is the Parsha Meraglim. So you have these two episodes, both tremendous lessons, but both also painful episodes. With last week's chapter, the scouts challenging the very premise of Hashem saying the promised land and Moshe sending them to figure out how to enter the land. Instead, they just came back with a conclusion: we cannot enter. And as Chassidus explains, and we discussed it somewhat last week, the Meraglim had good intentions. Their intention was they were spiritual entities, and spiritual people, and they were terrified of entering the material world and all its challenges. In a sense, every neshama has that same fear. That's why al korach, a soul has to be compelled to come into this world, because this world is not an easy world. And when you see it with your own eyes, as they did, it terrified them. Eretz echeles yeshveh. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants. They wanted to stay in the cocoon of the wilderness together with their Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Chassidus to their Rebbe, surrounded by the clouds of glory, getting bread from heaven, man lechem min hashamayim, and miraculous water, without any concerns. In a way, it was like a Gan Eden, at least temporary and on a surface level. So it was not a desert, but they were protected in all those ways. They suddenly see a land, they're going to have to enter into the marketplace. The possible corruption of the Wall Street and all the forces of dealing with the struggle and working and toiling in the material world, they put it in 3 words: Eretz, it's land that consumes its inhabitants. So what was their big error and their big sin? No one asked you whether, you were asked how to do it. Al Korach, you were told we have to go into the promised land. There are challenges, of course there are challenges, but you have all the strength to deal with these challenges. They wanted to remain in Ruchnis, but that's not the kavanah. Yes, it's more pleasant to be in heaven, Nuach la'adam shenivra mimshalei nivra mishanivra, as Shammai paskins, which means it's much more pleasant to live in the spiritual environment, in the spiritual oasis of Gan Eden heaven, where souls don't have bodies and don't have to deal with health issues, with livelihood issues, with all the other pains and abuse and other challenges that this life presents. But that's not the kavanah. The intention, the purpose is that the Moshe Rabbeinu, following God's orders, is to go into this land and transform it. And as Kolov and Yeshua said, it's Eretz Teiv Me'ed Me'ed. It's a very special land because in it is taka hidden, but hidden in it is powers and forces that you can release, you can never release in the spiritual environment of heaven, or in this case, the spiritual environment of the wilderness, of just sitting in the Kailil, surrounded by Torah and surrounded by Kedusha, without having to deal with the challenges of life. But those challenges are precisely what the purpose is. And why am I elaborating? Because this sets the stage for this week's parsha. Okay, so Korach hears what the Meraglim's mistake was, and that they wanted to stay in the holy spiritual state. Korach took the lesson very literally. If that's the case, let us be part of this world, and why do we need to have spiritual connection altogether? This is the kavanah. Korach said the purpose is dira b'tachtenim, lama tisnasu. Why did you, Moshe and Aaron, lift yourself or raise yourself up above everyone else? Everyone, kula eidig deishimim. Everyone is holy. There's holiness in everything. As he brought the proof from Tatalish Shekul Etcheles, and the same thing by Ismail Sfarim. What do you need a mezuzah? The whole house is filled with Sfarim. The talis is completely Etcheles. Why do you need one strand, or one tzitza? So everything is holy. As such, Korach went the other extreme, that if materialism is the place where you have the greatest treasures, the greatest divine treasures, in the language of Chassidus, the Koach ha'atzmos, the power of the essence itself to create this one, and this is what neshama, this is the desire, the divine desire, dafk in this world, let's go all the way. He went the other extreme, and his mistake was that it doesn't work that way. That in order to transform this world, you need to have the power of the neshama, and you have to need the power of our leaders, and starting with Moshe Rabbeinu, to direct and guide us. Yes, there's kedusha everywhere, there's godliness everywhere, but the world, it's concealed in the world, and we don't see it on our own. So to say, for example, Gashmias has a higher source and more power than Ruchnias, but who guides Gashmias? Gashmias has no guide, has no captain of the ship. It would be like saying the body has more power than the soul. Yes, indeed. But imagine a body without the guidance of the soul, without the guidance of the mind, of the heart, of the things we learn. That's why we learn Torah. That's why we need direction. That's why we're educated and we're inspired by teachers. Yes, the point is to transform this world, but you transform this world with the power of the higher spiritual worlds, Atzilus and so on. In the language of human beings, we're inspired by our teachers. We are not, we all have holiness and we all have godliness within us, but we are not all equal in the sense that it's revealed in each of us. And Korach's mistake led to the other extreme. What happened? That's exactly what happens to Korach. He went to the earth. He heard that they were afraid of the land because it consumes its inhabitants. So they said, let's stay in the spiritual realm. He said, let's go into the material realm. And what happened? Without spiritual power, without being tied above, and Itaka fell, and they were swallowed by the earth. Literally, the words of the Meraglim were fulfilled in Korach. Korach went, the Meraglim were correct, the land does have power to consume its inhabitants. Yet Hashem says, I give you the power to overcome that. And if you stand connected, like Yeshua and Kolov did, you stand connected to the source, with the proper iskashus and connection, you'll be able to transform the world instead of it affecting you. Korach said, I don't need the spiritual connection. Then what happens? You succumb and you become victim to the thing that you thought has so much spiritual power, and he gets consumed by the land, the earth itself. So the lesson, if you look in the Sichos of the Rebbe, he talks about this, and he also hints to it in the name Korach itself. The letters Korach, Kuf, Reish, Ches, are all, if you think of it, a distortion of the letter Hey. The letter Hey is the name in Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Hey is Hashem, divine. In Kuf Reish Ches, you see, it's all the letter Hey. They have 3 legs. A letter Hey has 3 legs, has the roof, has the right side, and has the left side, but there's a space between the left side and the top. In the Kuf, the left leg goes too short, goes down too much into the earth, too much materialism. Blamatim in Ashura. The Hey, it goes to the Shura, it doesn't go too far. So you have to go into the material world, but not too much immersion. Belay lev alev. Do your business, be involved, but don't let your whole head be in the galoshes, as the Rebbe Rashab said. You have to keep your head above. That's the kuf. The reish is missing the left leg. It's missing the left leg of either ma'isa, machshava, dibur, and missing ma'isa, the action, ma'isa mitzvahs, like the mitzvah of mezuzah, the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the ches is the 3 legs, but it's attached. The 3rd leg is attached to the roof, which means lacking bittul. The space, that little space that makes from a hey to a ches, or the other way around, from a ches to a hey, is the space of bittul, of pause, of deliberation, of humility, of modesty, the pause, which actually also transforms chometz into matzah into chometz. The mem tzadik are the same 2 letters, but the ches and the hey is what distinguishes chometz and matzah on Pesach. That the same letter, but when you have it closed, there's no breathing room. It's like the spout of a kettle. You need to have that opening, that humility, which is what creates matzah to be the bread of humility, and chometz is arrogance, the inflated ego, that is like the ches. So it's hinted to also in the letters. And the lesson, of course, to us is multifaceted. Above all, it begins to tell us, it teaches us the balance that's necessary. Yes, we need to be in this world, but not of this world. We need to be able to enter. And each of us has our periods in life when we have to go into the world with its challenges, and it's much more preferable to just stay home or stay in shul or stay in a spiritual state. But on the other hand, when you go, it has to be with the direction, and we need even more protection. As we say in the morning, you need the ata to protect it bikirbi, because once the soul is above in Tehera level, which is Atzilus, doesn't need quite that same protection. It's protected by its spiritual environment. But as it comes down into Bria, Yetzira, and then Nafachta, Nasiya, in this material world, that's where it needs Vishamra, and it comes from Ata. So we need that protection, we need that connection, because that's what keeps us sane and allows us to remain above as we transform the universe around us. So we need to be there, not like the Meraglim said, but we need to be there with the guidance of a Rebbe, of a Moshe Rabbeinu. The mistake that Korach made was they could just do it without that. And that's one tremendous lesson, which of course fits very well into Chodesh Taamuz. For us especially, the closest thing to us to Chodesh Taamuz is Gimel Taamuz, which we'll talk about next week more at length. But since Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh Taamuz and it's beginning of the month, Reish Chodesh, it includes all in the month. We also have the holiday Yom Tov of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Taamuz, which this year will be 90 years from Tafresh Pei Zayin. And of course, the Shavasar B'Taamuz. So it's like a very mixed month. It's a month of Geula on one hand, called Chodesh Geula because of the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe 90 years ago. On the other hand, we have Shavasar B'Taamuz, which was the beginning of the 3 weeks and the saddest period in Jewish history. All the 5 terrible events that happened and befell us. And then, of course, we have Gimel Taamuz, which on one hand, before it was 23 years ago, Gimel Taamuz was called by the Rebbe Schalta de Geula, the beginning of redemption. because that was the time when the Frierdiker Rebbe got the news that his verdict was turned over. Instead of death, God forbid, it was commuted to exile in Kostroma. And then that turned also over, and they let him free, a complete Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. So at Gimel Tammuz, it was still unknown. It was a miracle, but it was still not complete. Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz revealed that Gimel Tammuz was the beginning of the redemption. So it's interesting, because if you think about it, Gimel Tammuz for us, which, as I said, I'll talk about more, has those mixed feelings. On one hand, it's one of the darkest days. We don't have a connection, begoli. The connection is not seen in the revealed sense. But a Rebbe is nitzchi, and therefore continues to lead, but it's with more challenges. We need to have a lot more of our own effort to recognize that. So in a way, you could say Korach challenging what a Rebbe was exactly what Gimel Tammuz is about. For some, it can challenge. What is a Rebbe? The Rebbe is here, begoli, and everyone sees it, and it carries you on its wings. And he carries you on his wings, and all that came with it. It was not such a challenging thing. But when you don't see it, questions arise, and you start wondering, where is the Rebbe? Korach said, what do we need a Rebbe for? And his mistake was, of course, we absolutely always need a Rebbe. You need to have that connection to the source that allows us. Of course, everyone is holy. But we live in a material world. In the material world, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. We need to have that connection. So Gimel Tammuz offers us both elements. On one hand, it's still a sad day, but we believe absolutely that it's the beginning that will lead ultimately to the Gula Mitzvah Vashleim, and the same thing with 17th of Tammuz. On one hand, the beginning of all the sad events, and including, of course, Shavuos B'Tammuz, the first of those sad events was the breaking of the tablets by Moshe Rabbeinu. But on the other, and then of course the breaching of the Yerushalayim, of the wall around Yerushalayim, and then the other events that the Gemara, the Mishnah, and the Gemara elaborate on. But we also say that these days shall be transformed to holidays, even brought in halacha by the Rambam at the end of Hilchas Tainus. And when it comes, for example, to the breaking of the tablets, we know that Rebbe's powerful sichos, especially the Simchas Torah Tov Shem Mem Zayin that comes to mind, that Rashi concludes the whole Chumash with Shavuos B'Tammuz without mentioning that date. He said, what was Kol Eisus HaMevsim Asher Asa Moshe Le'enei Kol Yisrael? He says, it is the breaking of the tablets. And Hashem says, Yesher Koichecha Sheshevarta. Thank you for breaking them. Because with that, Moshe preserved the connection between the Jewish people and God, because it was like the Ksuba, as Rashi says in Kisisa. He tore the Ksuba, they didn't receive the contract. So yes, they did it, transgressed, but they haven't yet received the contract. So hidden in this seemingly terrible event was also the unbelievable love of Moshe Rabbeinu and his connection to the people, and ultimately achieved the Salachti Kidvarecha of Yom Kippur when he came back with the second tablets. So obviously it's a negative event, but it turns out to become the catalyst for a very powerful force of transformation, like the MyLife Bali Tshuva over at Tzaddikim. So in a sense, Chodesh Tammuz is that, as the Rebbe explains in different sichos. The word Tammuz itself is a word of Avodah Zarah. These are the Shemesh Oleimam Mibovel, because the names of the months in general are not mentioned in Tanakh. They were names that they adapted when they went to Bovel, the Eden, after the destruction of the first temple. In Torah, the primary way months are called are by number. Chodesh Harishon is Nisan, Chodesh Hasheni is Iyar, Chodesh Hashlishi is Sivan, Chodesh Haravi is Tammuz. So Tammuz has this dual element. On one hand, dark moments. On the other hand, dark moments that lead to greater power, which of course Golus in general, and for us in particular, the events of Tammuz, the ones that are Esat are still in our eyes negative ones, that we will ultimately see, and hopefully very soon, even before Tammuz begins, their transformation. But we, and this is the key message of Chassidus applied, is we need to hold strong, not be nispal, not be overwhelmed, and not be distracted by what sometimes appears to be great challenges, and realize every challenge is meant to bring greater strength. So essentially the challenges, both of the Meraglim and then of Korach, really reveal something. That's why the Torah tells us the story. He challenged it, but we learned tremendous lessons of what his kashrus is about, what a Rebbe is about, and the necessity for it in transforming this world and leading us to the Geula, where all the seemingly negative stuff will all be transformed. Okay, that's the intro. I would add as well that, as I said, I will speak about this next week, but also in the last few years, I don't see the episodes themselves. I discussed this as well, Korach and Taamuz, but I believe I touched upon some additional points from the Rebbe's Sichos. So let us now move into some questions. And here's a good opportunity. If you want to submit any question completely and utterly anonymously, please go to meaningfullife.com/mylife. There's a forum there, and you can ask any question. If you receive the email also has a link to ask those questions. If you want to add your contact information for whatever reason, because you want us to send you something or you want to remain in touch with us, please add that into the form. If not, we have no way of reaching you. So, no, this is a one-way street, so to speak, this forum. You could also ask questions, you can comment, add things, and hopefully participate in this exhilarating journey applying Chassidus to our lives. Now, the question here is, since as we enter the summer vacation season, how does a Chassid uniquely look at this period? What advice does the Rebbe offer for making the most of summer break? So firstly, let me refer to you to episodes 73 and 119. Again, 73 and 119. This topic has been addressed previously, and you can all see it in the archives, the same link I gave you before, the same link, which is meaningfullife.com/mylife. There's archives. If you go to archive episode 73 and 119, and for the record, you can also download it as an MP3 or access it, and there's timestamps, and you'll hear more information and more stuff that I talked about vacation. But since it is a new year, and the new year we talk about this question, let's talk about how does a Chassid look at summer. Remember, the Chassidus looks at everything in fresh eyes. You look at something at the surface level, you see it one way. When you look at it with neshama eyes, you see so-called the soul, or the energy within that particular experience. So summer offers many things to us, whether it's summer vacation, whether things are warmer and it's more relaxed, whether it's travel, whether it's time essential into camp, and people do different things that are more, and I said, a little more laid back. All the different elements, these are the externals. How a Chassid looks at something, of anything, with neshama eyes. What's the purpose and the soul of it all? What's the meaning? Why do we have summer vacation? What is the meaning of it? And the Rebbe, of course, has a number of letters and answers and spoke about it a number of times. You probably all can imagine that the word vacation, which comes from the word vacant, to vacate, is obviously not something that's at all aligned with Torah or with Chassidus. We don't vacate anything. We never vacate. That would indicate like an emptying out, which is the opposite of being productive. We can go through different stages of how we are productive. And that's, of course, the key, understanding the summer. But to say vacating, like retiring, is completely antithetical to the idea of Adam L'Omni Aval, that a person was created to perform, to work, to toil, to produce. And we always have to produce. So I want to read a short from a letter from Tafshin Yud Beis, one of the early letters from the Rebbe, where he writes to the Jewish students and school children everywhere, and talks about this vacation. There are a few other sources. There's many more than obviously I'm going to read here, but it's always good to get a nice taste. This is a very interesting angle in the Rebbe's words. Everybody wants this letter, just send us an email, but send us your email address. You could do it on the form I mentioned, and we will send you this letter with pleasure. So here's the Rebbe speaks about the following. He says, vacation time is approaching to release youth and children, boys and girls, from yeshivas, Talmud Torahs, day schools, etc., for a long summer recess. It's the Rebbe's words. It's an English letter. The importance of a restful vacation is obvious. However, certain aspects of vacation time should be examined carefully. Is vacation time a stoppage of study, or is it a transition from one form of activity to another? In all living forms, there is no such thing as a stoppage of life, followed by a completely new start. For a stoppage of life is death, and cannot serve as a temporary rest period. There can be a transition from one form of activity to another, but not a cessation or stoppage. For example, the two most vital organs in our body are the heart and the brain. The heart is the principal seat of physical life. The brain is the principal seat of intellectual life. Because the heart and the brain have supreme control of the body, they are called the sovereign of the body. We call Shelit, the Sheltim. Now these organs not only do not cease to operate in a living body, but they do not even undergo a radical change in their form of activity. And inasmuch as the actions of the other organs are being led by the activity of the heart and brain, it follows that the other organs of the body, though they may seem to be in a state of inactivity, as in the case of sleep, do not in reality stop working. This is even more obvious in the case of breathing. We find that during sleep, breathing is slowed down considerably, but it never stops, for the breath of life must always be there. Similarly, in the case of students, boys and girls, studying our Torah, Torah Chaim, the law of life. Restful vacation does not mean interruption and stoppage of Torah and mitzvahs, God forbid. It means only just another way of furthering their course of study, a period during which they renew their mental abilities and increase their capacities for a more intensive study later on. Therefore, my friends, bring light and holiness into your vacation time by remembering always that it is a time of preparation in order to improve the quality and quantity of your studies during study time to follow. But let it not remain so only in your thoughts and intentions. Be always united with our holy Torah in your everyday actions and conduct. Let not a single day pass without the breath of life provided by the Torah of life. Let everyone have appointed times for the study of Chumash, Mishnah, Gemara, and so on, each one according to his or her standard of Torah education. At this time, I wish everyone who is resolved to use his or her vacation in this productive living way, quote unquote, much success both during vacation as well as on returning to normal study later on, with blessing. Couldn't say, and there's nothing really needs to be added. The Rebbe's own words, beautiful way of expressing what vacation is all about. I remember when we were children and we received Talks and Tales, I always remember the summer editions would come, and there was always in the back, there was always that box that said that summer is a vacation of the body, but not of the soul. It's a time where you can let the body's challenges be a little more relaxed so the soul can really exercise itself. Similar idea, the same spirit. I just saw also another thing, which I might as well, out of interest, the Chvevusa de Milsa El Babich News Service press release, which was issued Yud Beis Taamuz Tovshin Chov Daled, 1964. Actually, let me correct myself. It was a press release issued after the Farbrengen of Yud Beis Taamuz Tovshin Chov Daled, and was edited by the Rebbe, and basically says Lubavitcher Rebbe Rabbi the Menachem Mem Schneerson announced his disapproval of the fact that nearly all Jewish educational institutions closed their doors during the summer period. The Rebbe stated that this lapse in education must be avoided and urged that schools provide a constructive summer program for the children in schools and that similar programs be arranged in resort areas. So there's more talk about this, but we'll talk about summer is still just entering, so we'll talk more lessons. But the same idea, which is essentially that life does not end, and just like the organs, the soul, the heart and the mind and the breathing are always there, and there they don't even go through any changes, we always have to remember spiritual life, there's no such thing as stopping. It's just a matter of different forms, as the Rebbe says in the letter. So I believe that answers the question better than any words I will say about it, and that deals with that. Let's go to the next question, and that is, can I use other spiritual paths to enhance my Judaism? Traditional Judaism resonates with the core of my being and my experiences. Yet I am wondering whether I can incorporate aspects of other spiritual paths to enhance my Judaism. Can I blend different religions and spiritual practices while maintaining traditional Judaism as my primary path? And another questioner, a little differently, words it like this: thank you for your inspiring and interesting lessons. The crossroad I have come to is this: as an individual, I can choose between going along a unique, distinct spiritual path with different spiritual flavors and figure it out all on my own, or I can walk a spiritual path that is proven and tested over generations in a way that is prepared for me. The latter is the one thing I would like to discuss here. If I choose an ancient and traditional way, Kabbalah, it comes with some downsides and a few compromises. On the other hand, if I choose a unique path, it's like a banquet. There is It is like a banquet where there's full freedom. This I see as conformity versus individuality, these two choices. For me, it seems to be very difficult to eat kosher because of the way the animals are treated, cover my head because it collides with individuality, freedom, and soulful expression. Circumcise babies, I believe it is harmful. I would like to add another issue, that the truth is found in many spiritual traditions. These are the questions that I'm wondering if you could be so kind to answer. Do I have to eat kosher food? Is being a vegetarian a true alternative? Do I have to cover my hair? Is a synthetic wig irrelevant alternative? Do I have to engage in the circumcision practice of my own children to be part of Torah's tradition? Can I blend different religions and spiritual practices and at the same time let Kabbalah be the main road? The different spiritual teachings like facets on a diamond. Lastly, these questions premise is that I have the premise of these questions is that I have the chance to be part of a Kabbalistic spirituality. Are there any requirements to join Kabbalah? What is the perspective of Kabbalistic tradition of being married to one that is not? Kabbalah teaching resonates with the core of my being and my experiences. Kabbalah nurtures and acknowledges spiritual growth, and at the same time I have a longing for knowing God more, and this seems to be the path. Okay, there's a lot of details here. I don't know if I can cover every one, but let me just put things into context. Firstly, refer you also to episodes 63, 65, and 90, where I all spoke about these topics as well. But to answer the first question, so obviously God created the universe and created many different people, and there are different schools of thought and many different ideas that people through their own efforts came to understand. So it's not a surprise that there are truths, there are resonating truths in many disciplines, and some of them very similar to one another, even if it was purely based on the human endeavor and the human search. People with their minds and their hearts explore deeper purpose, will come to certain ideas, and they can be very similar from one end of the world to another. Just like you find in science, that you also often have very different schools, even though they did not know of each other, came to discover similar ideas. Now, obviously today, with the ability to collaborate, the ability to know of one another, you can make those comparisons. Once upon a time, without the communications that we have today and travel and so on, those were all isolated. So there's no surprise and nothing shocking to state that you have truths everywhere. But then there's the other way around, divine revelation, where the divine, where God himself shares his wisdom with us directly. Now, till the Sinai, from a Torah point of view, that revelation came in bits and pieces, but not in any formal and definitely not all encompassing and comprehensive way. Abraham searched for God, and then God met him, so to speak, revealed himself. Same thing with others. But at Sinai, a mandate was given, a formal mandate called the Torah. And I speak with the axioms, of course, the Jewish axiom, and the basis of this is, I'm not going now into proofs, just discussing this axiom that the Torah is the blueprint with which God created the universe, and it's the operator's manual. Is it true that you can find things in other religions and other systems that are also in the Torah? Absolutely. Especially the areas of wisdom. It says, Chachma b'goyim tamim, which means you believe that the nations of the world have wisdom. Some of it they discover through their own, some of it maybe through their prophets. Remember, Bilam was a prophet, and there are different revelations that may have happened throughout history that brought different wisdom to different people. We know Abraham sent his children to the east, and so on. So, but that at the same time, from a Jewish perspective, the Torah is the full body, the full work that includes everything we need to live our lives to the highest purpose. Now, obviously, you read a scientific manual or you hear a story, it can reinforce it. It can reveal parts of the Torah that we may not have seen on our own, but it's all in there. And generally speaking, the initial approach is that you can find it all in Torah. Hafach ba v'hafach ba the kula ba. Turn the pages and turn, and you'll find everything is there. And if you don't find it, we say imreku. If you don't find it, you come up empty-handed. Mikem, it's from you, or you're lacking something. However, there are people that began the other way around. They studied other disciplines. Look at Yisro. Yisro was a chacham, he was a wise man, and studied all the schools of thought in the world. But then he came to realize, when he met Moshe Rabbeinu, and he met God, the Jewish God, so to speak. I don't say the Jewish God, the God of the Jews. He says, Ati daiti, now I know that this God is greater than all. This doesn't mean the other wisdoms didn't have wisdom. As a matter of fact, The Zohar and Chassidus explains that Matan Torah could not have happened unless Yisrei came and acknowledged that. So there is a place where they converge. But the end of the day is if everything is in one book, why need to look elsewhere? However, there are people who did not know of this book. And they did search, either on their own, or they traveled different places, had different type of mentors and teachers. And fine, and they found that. And then they came to discover Torah. So there's nothing wrong to say that because you saw that, it's a stepping stone that leads you to those truths. So you have to look at it from the perspective of the individual. A person will initially, you can find it all in the Torah. Can there be other ideas that reinforce it? Absolutely. Do you need to turn there? Most likely not. What would be the need? However, if a person happens to come from that world or grow up without any Torah Jewish education, they have been exposed to ideas coming from all kinds of sources. Some may be kosher sources, not kosher sources, or sources that are neutral. And then from that they learned and they discovered God, they discovered a higher purpose. I mean, we always validate that and we say, okay, now that you've learned that, now into the Torah and you can learn it more, and you can embrace it in a full-bodied, comprehensive book. Here's not the place and not the time to compare Torah to other systems. That's not the discussion here. So to answer your question, the answer is no, we do not need to have other sources to enhance it. You have it all that's necessary. You don't need to confuse yourself. If you come from a world where you know those already, then that's part of life. That's like you acquired knowledge in different places, then for sure incorporate it and integrate it with your Torah, wherever possible. Things that are not permissible or things that are anti-Torah thinking or things that were wrong, fine. Like in any type of growth and knowledge, you grow and you learn things, and as you grow, some things you discard, some things you integrate, some things you develop and you modify. Like in any type of the accumulation of knowledge. As far as the other questions you're asking, the second questioner, a Torah has its guidelines. Yes, kosher is part of the guidelines, covering hair is part of the guidelines, part of the guidelines is who you marry, part of the guidelines is also, what else did you ask me about, circumcision. These are mitzvahs in the Torah. If a person wants to embrace the Torah, this is what's called embracing it. If you have a challenge in any given area, you should sit down and speak about it with a mentor, with a mashpia, with a teacher, with a rav, or someone you trust, and they'll help you understand or deal with it. We all have challenges when it comes to different mitzvahs, but at the same time, just because we have challenges, we can't change the doctrine. The doctrine is a doctrine. It has its reasons. Some of the reasons we understand. Some of the reasons are beyond our understanding. But we consider it to be the divine mandate. This is the divine doctrine. This doesn't mean you have to force on anybody, but if you have challenge with anything, discuss it with someone. But there is a doctrine, like everything has a doctrine. And you'll be surprised to know that when you study it, you start realizing it's far more open-minded and much more flexible than you may think. Obviously, there are very laws, yes and no, there's rights and wrongs. But understanding, the appreciation is not closed-minded at all. It's an appreciation of what God wants of us in this world. And it expands your horizons. It doesn't narrow your horizons as you experience the transcendental teachings of Torah. It's transcendence. And as I said again, it has in it everything you need to have. So I encourage anyone who's asking such questions that has this struggle, study it, but you find the right teacher to study it with. And again, if you do have wisdoms and ideas that come from other places, by all means, if it's integratable and it's consistent, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's no reason for someone initially to have to go there in the first place. If anybody wants to follow up with this, by all means, obviously we just try to stick to a limited time about each of these questions, even if they deserve a lot more discussion. Let's go to the next question. How do we reconcile the Chassidic standard of non-indulgence in the material with the lavish dinners thrown by Torah and Chassidic institutions? Okay. Are the lavish dinners consistent with Chassidic standards? Very good. Okay, that's a new question. I don't recall such a question. So let me read it in full glory here. How do we reconcile the emphasis Chassidus places on not indulging in material delights with extravagant gala dinners done by Torah-based and Chassidic organizations, indulging people with fine food and wine? There are even events that take place in bars with DJs and partying, especially when targeting younger crowds. Is this not a blatant contradiction to the discretion and simplicity demanded by Torah and especially Chassidus? My intent is not to criticize, rather my questions come from a perspective of trying to understand how to see the examples I bring in the appropriate light. I see these great gala dinners with all this indulgence that I just mentioned. I struggle finding a balance between these two sides. On one hand, in yeshiva, I was educated in the path that we are not to be comfortable in this world. And a life of materialism, luxury items, and enjoyment is not something to pursue. Rather, Torah and mitzvahs, helping others and creating a world where God may dwell is the focus. Do these events not completely flout this distinction, celebrating achievements in the holy, godly side by relishing in the physicality? On a more personal level, is meeting up with a friend for a beer or going out to enjoy a nice meal something I should feel guilty about? In my perspective, too black and white, how can I come to see the healthy medium? Okay. It's a very good question. I really went to look and search if there's anything from the Rebbe on this topic. I could not find something directly. That doesn't mean there isn't. I ask help from any of the listeners, anyone hearing this. If there's something from the Rebbe on this topic, please share it with me for the benefit of the public and my benefit as well, because then I can share it. But I will use, based on different letters and different answers from the Rebbe, try to respond to this. The first thing we have to determine, obviously, is whether it's just indulgence or an extravagance, or it has something that's l'shem shamayim. To say to throw a party of any sort, a lavish party that has nothing to do with kedusha, Yiddishkeit, Torah, mitzvahs, and l'shem shamayim, is absolutely, from a Chassidus point of view, from Torah, probably osir even. But let's not even say it's prohibited. It's definitely not a Chassidish thing to do, because we're not supposed to be sitting and indulging ourselves in partying. We're not talking now relaxing. We're not talking about neutral things that can be used for good, as he explains in Tanya. But in Tanya makes it very clear. Even eating a meal, even eating a kosher meal and drinking wine, not zeil v'sevi. If you don't eat and drink for l'shem shamayim, for the strength you get to do mitzvahs, it belongs in the world of klippas negan, and it can go to the opposite than kedusha. So the first thing we have to establish is that whatever we do is b'chol derechecha de'eu v'chol masacha yu l'shem shamayim. That everything has to be directed toward a higher goal. I'll just share a quick story with this that happened, that just recently was reminded by one of the shluchim. There's a shliach in Long Island who reminded me of this story, which I don't even remember. He planned a summer outing with his community on a yacht, on a boat, with food and wine, the whole thing, with music, and wrote into the Rebbe about it. And the Rebbe wrote back, Hashayches l'Torah and mitzvahs, question mark. What's the connection between this and Torah and mitzvahs? He called me up, we were friends, and he said to me, what do you think this means? So I said, well, generally the Rebbe's asking such a question, I would just nix the whole thing. Kasha for Rebbe means it's not kedai to do. We're going to start. He says, no, but it wasn't just that he planned it, he just felt in his heart, he said that maybe the Rebbe does want an answer. And he was a Chassidish shliach, and a very Chassidish. It wasn't like he already planned it and he didn't want to cancel and trying to find some way around it. So he says, can you write to the Rebbe? So I'm writing to the Rebbe. First of all, the answers to you have nothing to do with it. But he really made me crazy. He says, you have to write to the Rebbe for me. Okay, so I decided, since I'm not signing it anyway, he's signing it. If he gets it over his head, he gets it over his head, not me. So I sat down, I wrote something up for him. I said, I didn't even remember at the time. I'll tell you, you'll see from the end of the story what I did remember. So I wrote up that the Shachs the mitzvahs, obviously, I neglected to mention, obviously, that the Rebbe wrote with a very derech and very subtle and respectful way, that the Rebbe nixes this whole thing. I'm asking mechil and slicha for anything I'm answering that maybe just shouldn't be, but maybe, just to explain to the Rebbe, maybe some things I missed in my letter of mentioning that obviously we'll do Teira Aveda Gemilas Chasadim on the yacht, on the boat. We'll learn something, we'll say a prayer together, we'll daven, and we'll give tzedakah and take achlotas. And the whole purpose of it is not just to have fun. The purpose is, today it's one of the methods that gets people out, interested, like an outing. And to get them interested, really all the kavanah is to bring them closer to Yiddishkeit. All this was not mentioned. He just mentioned the yacht as an activity. And I also added that the Rebbe in the year Tov Shemem Gimel, Pesach, spoke about the famous story with Chase, about being on a yacht, and the whole lesson that Rebbe spoke about the yacht, where he asked the captain of the yacht, which way is east to daven mincha, and the effect that it had. And the Rebbe spoke a whole lesson from Ayat and Avedis Hashem, that the boat, from the Baal Shem Tov and from other places, that the Zohar that talk about a boat is a moshel for the neshama coming down to our body and living in this fight and protecting us from the seas. Lessons from Yena and the ship he escaped on. So I wrote this all about Bekitzer to the Rebbe. And what happened was that Shabbos, Pasha Ekev, Tov Shin Mem Zayin, it was, I believe, Chof Ov, or at least the Shabbos before Chof Ov. I think the Rebbe spoke about it. He says, Letzten Sidah Inu from the Naya Veg, and one of the new ways recently of spreading Torah and Yiddishkeit, the mitzvahs, and Afutzim and Chutzah is through a Bayat. And the Rebbe spoke a whole lesson from Bayat and Avedis Hashem. The Rebbe was Magiyah the Sikha, and it's printed in Sefer HaSichas Tov Shemem Zayin. So I remember because I prepared the Sikha. That part I remember, but I never remembered the first half that he told me about. So here's a perfect example. The void of Torah mitzvahs, what's the shaykhs? Once he answered it, the Rebbe answered him, of course, that he should do it, b'shot tev mitzachas and everything. So yes, this was mazel. It could have been also got a chelik, a good chelik. Why you even ask me? I already asked my question. But you can see sometimes the Rebbe does want an answer. Like even summer camps, we know it wasn't right away the Rebbe said yes. The Rebbe wanted a case to be made. Rabbi Lazar talks about how they made a case to the Rebbe in Yechidus with Kohos Weiss. Let's not go into it right now. The point is that it's key, everything is L'Shem Shamayim. Now let's talk about the lavishness. That's a very good question. How far do you go? You do an event, and you want to attract people and make a Kiddush Hashem. Again, this is a given that it's L'Shem Shamayim. We're not talking about anything outside of that. How far do you go? Let's say you're inviting wealthy people. They're used to certain standards. If you do it cheaply, or you do it in any low, under par, meaning not up to the standard, they may not come, or they definitely will not have a good experience. So this is a question that needs to be established case by case. As long as it's L'Shem Shamayim and the Kavona, then that's maybe why we have galas and why we have dinners. Maybe that's why these halls were created in the first place, to use them for Kedusha. Now, overindulgence, just for someone to party, or with DJs and so on and so forth, especially if they go over the line of things api halacha and Kedusha and so on, yes, it needs to be asked by a Rav and by Mashpia whether it's appropriate. But I'm assuming we're not talking about anything inappropriate. We're talking lavish. We're talking about how much to indulge in. So indulgence in general is not a Chassidish thing. But if it's L'Shem Shamayim and you're doing a high standard event, a high level event, because of the reasons you need to do it, whether it's even for raising money for in a successful way, or other things that these type of people are used to, then that's taka the kavanah, to use this, to use the money that you spend and to use the gashmis in order to make from it ruchnis. But with that first premise as a condition. Without that, there's for sure no room for it. And even with it, I'm also suggesting it needs to be looked at case by case to see whether we're not going overboard and not doing it the right and appropriate way. As far as going out with a personal level, is something we talked about in previous episodes about enjoying life as opposed to enjoying the world and Torah. Everything, there's Kedusha, there's Isur, and there's Rishus. Going out with a friend to connect with each other, drinking a beer or something like that, there's nothing prohibited. And you're doing it in order ultimately for the Shem Shamayim, even if it's not direct mitzvah, of course there's room for it. That's why we sleep and that's why we take walks. We do many things that are Rishus, they're not holy, they're not opposite of holy. And you could turn it into a means to something holy. So that's the answer to that in all circumstances. Now, are we all on that level? That's already another question, whether where you stand. But you want to know the standard, that's the standard. Let's go to the next question. What does the Torah say about marijuana usage? Okay. Did the Rebbe ever discuss the use of marijuana? Among Frum Jews, there appears to be no clear understanding whether recreational marijuana is considered a Torah transgression. Most agree there are definitely issues with it, but don't think it's a serious transgression. Is there a Torah consensus about the usage of marijuana? How is it different than other more acceptable practices like smoking cigarettes or having a beer to wind down? Rabbi Jacobson, living in Colorado where marijuana became legal for recreational consumption, led me to meet plenty of observant Jews who don't see anything wrong with smoking occasionally a joint. As I tried to do some more research on this matter, I discovered a letter from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein banning marijuana consumption, naming several prohibitions from the Torah. One cannot study Torah, pray, and properly perform mitzvahs under the influence. Ben Seder made it for creating within himself a very strong desire, even though it is to eat kosher food, also known as munchies. Kibud Avim, number 3, Kibud Avim, going against the parents' will. Many people legitimize their marijuana use because it is not addicting, is not physically addictive, and is less harmful to one's body than alcohol, cigarettes, or other drugs. Yet marijuana is addicting psychologically. When one experiences the high, one's mind will yearn for this feeling again and again. It is stated in Tanya that the brain is the dwelling place of the divine soul. So it seems to me that marijuana is attacking exactly that, the most vital part of the Jew, his intellect, nefesh elikis. After observing people under influence of this drug, it seems that their intellectual control of oneself gets weakened, so that one's mind can't overcome the heart, and one becomes dominated by one's physical desires, nefesh habamis, which resides in the heart. This all opposes the very core of Yiddishkeit, which aspires the conquering of physical by spiritual. It seems that among frum Jews there is no clear understanding if recreational marijuana consumption is a transgression, but very clear, based on what I've just said, that seems to be the case. I would love to hear if you have any letters from the Rebbe which address marijuana use in particular. Thank you very much for your lectures and everything else you do for the community. Well, you really answered the question yourself, and I would agree with everything you've said. There's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's answer, so that's halacha. You need a halacha question, go to a Rav. As I always said, this is not a platform for halacha questions. Moshe Feinstein does have, Rabbi Feinstein does have the arguments, the 3 arguments he makes, especially the first one, that you're not under control. And the same is true, frankly, with alcohol and with anything else. A Jew is supposed to be, a human being is supposed to be in control of themselves. Anything that lacks that control, or it takes away inhibitions or other stuff, is most likely going to tamper with a person's real responsibility is to serve God in this world. And if you think about it, why is one taking marijuana, for what purposes? If it's medicinal purposes, so then like any medication, that's another story, we're not talking about that. For feeling better, is that the Torah way to feel better through mediums? So even if one were to say it's not a direct prohibition, it's definitely not in the spirit. And for that matter, all other dependencies. Everything, whether it's tobacco, whether it's alcohol, whether it's any other thing that a person takes, that's not for pure healing, but for their own comfort or their own escape sometimes from dealing with the challenges of life. So in that sense, it is antithetical more in spirit, and what you're saying is correct. Some things, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, attack a klippa that attacks a certain part of you, but things that attack the mind and attack your capacity, your consciousness, your state of consciousness and your level of awareness, and they are in some way replacing your responsible behavior in that regard, may not have the same prohibition like a Avodah Zarah, or of course we're talking about, or something treif, like he speaks in Tanya, but it attacks the fundamental faculties of the human being. And that, in that sense, it is a toxic. It is a pollutant, a spiritual pollutant. So I have not seen any letter from the Rebbe. I've seen a letter about LSD, where the Rebbe says he's not a pharmacologist, yeah. But however, anything he says that you take, that you consume, that somewhat takes control of your life, somewhat is not replacing your responsibility, is antithetical to the spirit of Torah. Tomim tiyim Hashem Elokecha. That's why we don't go to fortune tellers either. That's why we don't read the stars and we don't read palms and so on. Even if there may be a wisdom there. Tomim tiyim Hashem Elokecha. Go the straight path. If you have to work hard, work hard. Sometimes life requires pain. To get rid of pain does not necessarily mean you're doing yourself a favor. Again, I'm not talking medicinal, I'm not talking about something a doctor is prescribing. Because pain, challenges, is what makes us grow. And when you undermine that, you're undermining your capacity, the motivation to truly grow. That's ultimately what I would say is the real problem, the biggest problem with marijuana or with other things. To truly grow and be yourself, you need to face life directly and not numb it and not in any way escape and not in any way run away from it. And in that sense, in the spirit of why we were sent to this earth, was not just to be comfortable and to just be nice and everything is blissful. You need to deal with the challenges of life. Okay. We have a few more questions, and then we'll go to the Chassidus question and the essays. Let me see here, time, as far as time goes. What can we learn from the Rebbe's tone when speaking to children? We usually emphasize the Rebbe's gentle and compassionate way of speaking to children in particular. But it appears that in some sikhs delivered to children, the Rebbe's tone sounds harsh. What can we learn from the Rebbe's way, the Rebbe when it comes to talking to children? I was listening to a sikh of a rally to children in the MEMS, that's the 80s. The Rebbe was saying how children should not play tricks with Hashem by lying to their parents, that they already said brachas so they can eat right away in the AM. Shouldn't lie about that. The Rebbe's tone was pretty stern. It sounded very much like a sikh about Eretz Yisrael. Aren't we supposed to speak softly to children, so why the harsh tone? Okay, well, I'm not sure what sikh you're referring to, but I am familiar with the Rebbe's sikhs on these matters and the times he did speak this way. But I'm surprised at your question. As you know, when you ask a question about the Rebbe and sikh to children, it would be wise to listen to all the sikhs, not every one, but just to get the gist. If you listen to the talks of the Rebbe to children, the most gentle tone you'd ever hear, the gentleness, the kindness, the compassion, the love, in all the sikhs, is like oozing from every line. So once you see that, you know that there's no way that the Rebbe is suddenly becoming stern and harsh. When that's the tone, and that's the tone the Rebbe educated us to speak to all people, let alone children. Now, when you know that context, everything changes. Then you ask yourself the question, okay, so why in this particular line does it sound a little harsher? And here's the tremendous lesson. Speaking kindly and compassionately and lovingly does not mean we don't have standards. It means that the way you convey the standards is with kindness and with love, not with harshness, not with rebuke, not with anger, and not with negativity. Always with a positivity. That's the beauty. It wasn't just speaking gently, let's speak nicely to children and give them candies. Yes, the Rebbe was saying and encouraging them that because if you look in the Sikh, you'll see, because you're children of Hashem and you have such a great responsibility. So the Rebbe was teaching a lesson, I'm not sure where the lesson was from, but one of the lessons that you should not say things that are not true. So you can tell someone, yell at them, don't lie, or you can say, because you're such a beautiful person, because you're Hashem's child, you have such responsibilities, be honest. So the Rebbe, yes, has standards and was very clearly conveying the standards, which of course is the Torah standards, how children should behave and with their parents, and they should, like you said, not play tricks with Hashem and know that Hashem is always watching. Like it brings from the Yud Beis Psukim, Hine Hashem nitzav alav, ubeichin kloyes v'lev, and watching him whether you're serving properly. Why do we need to be told this? Everyone, children too, because it's easy sometimes in this lifetime to think that no one's watching. So the Rebbe was making that emphasis. Does it come across as a strong point? Absolutely. But it's still not any contradiction to the love and the kindness, especially, as I said, when you see the whole context. So love does not mean we compromise on our standards. Love does not mean that we do not share with our children the disciplines that are necessary. But it's coming from so much love that they would love to embrace it, because not as a rule, it's coming from such a beautiful place. That's my answer to your question. Next question. See, we're running low on time, so we have here, I'm going to leave this question about the global warming and environment for next week because of time limitations. I'm going to make sure I covered everything else. Okay. Okay. So because of time, I'm going to go straight to the Chassidus question. There's one question, as I said, I will deal with next week. Good. The Chassidus question for this week is someone asking a question about Likutei Torah from last week's Parsha Shlach, which actually was just yesterday. In Likutei Torah of last week, Shlach, the Maimer called Dibra Maschel Lahavin Inyan HaNesachim, which talks about the Nesachim. Nesachim were the libations, I think it's called, that they poured on the Mizbeach when different offerings were brought. We learn, in this Maimer, in Likutei Torah Shlach, we learn that the reason why wine has the power to reveal the inner dimension of the soul is because the wine was hidden in its grapes. So what he says there, I'm just elaborating, is that the wine is hidden in the grapes. So just like Nichnas Yain Yotze Seid, you pour wine in secret comes out. The same thing like in the physical grape. You squeeze the grape, so the juice comes out. You wouldn't even know the power it has until you extract it from the grape and turn it into wine, which is, of course, the whole fermentation and the whole processing of wine. That's what the Alter Rebbe says there, why wine has the power to reveal the inner dimension. The question is, why is this not the case when it comes to other juices, which are extracted from the fruit? Correct? Orange juice, grapefruit juice, pineapple juice, everything has that element, juice that comes from a fruit. Also, all alcoholic beverages have a similar effect of loosening inhibition and allowing the inner person, the inner dimension of the nefesh, to express itself. So why is wine singled out? Thank you very much for these amazing classes. Excellent question. So let's begin with the first, the most important premise. Everything in this material world evolves from its spiritual counterpart. So if we have a grape, there's a spiritual concept, archetype called grape. Obviously not a physical one, it's a concept, it's an idea, it's an archetype. Just like water, physical water, what is that? It's archetype, chesed, love and kindness, flows from the higher to the lower like water flows. What is the physical counterpart of gvura? Is eish, fire. Gvura crushes, instead of expanding, fire contracts. Fire is reddish. The exact opposite of so that's gvura, discipline, associated with fire. So everything has its archetypes, and that's where they evolve from, those higher levels, and as they evolve into the physical level, they take on the shape and form of what we call a physical object. So when we look at wine, we don't start the opposite, that first wine happens to be a fruit, that you squeeze it, and that's why it's the real secrets. No, wine evolves from a level, yayin de le'elo. And there, wine has a particular power. Mesameich lev anoshim. It says yayin dafke. We make kiddush on wine, and we see wine has properties besides being revealed. The inside has properties that actually lifts a person's spirit. It affects us. Obviously, we're not talking about overindulging or anything out of moderation, but wine has certain effects on us that orange juice or other juices don't. So when you take it all into account, wine comes from a very particular level. And Imre Bine, based on the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, explains that wine and oil actually, as Rosa deraisa and Rosa derozin, oil is actually even deeper than wine in some ways. There he explains the difference why oil, for example, doesn't have the meshaket element. It does not intoxicate somebody. It does not lift someone's spirits. But it has a different particular, but oil is also squeezed out of an olive. So the squeezing is only a secondary point. First they begin with, but yayin and shemen are two levels, just like you have the 7 different minim, species by which we praise as Yisrael that we eat on Tu B'Shvat and so on. The same thing is wine and oil, which are part of those, have particular spiritual features, and where does it manifest in this physical world is yayin. That's why yayin has a particular blessing in it, Barich Priya Gofen. Wine has, as I said, used for the Nesachim and the Mizbeach. Wine is said kiddush. You make a blessing on wine, and every davar shel b'kedusha, whether it's by a chuppah or other such events. Why wine? Not just because it's a hidden juice, because wine itself has that power, and that's why it's a hidden juice. Now, of course, the question then is, does other juices have any other? Yeah, they have lessons. The lesson is that every fruit has in it, you can extract the liquid from it. The part of this Chassidus brings from the part is that everything also extracts oil from everything. And we see different type of foods and different things we extract, which teaches us that there's deeper energy in everything in existence. But if you want a connection to sanctity, and that's the word I should have used earlier, sanctity with wine, that's dafka wine. And that's even more than shemen. So wine has that feature, and one of the elements of it is the element that, just like a grape, when it's squeezed, the hidden juice is revealed, and then when it's processed, it becomes wine. The same thing, wine has that impact on us, that it brings out our inner strengths, our inner capacities, which is why yayin is compared to Rosh, secrets of Torah, the secrets of Torah, and the yayin is actually gematria, the same gematria as yayin. Yotze Seid and yayin are the same gematria, which is 70. The gemat 70, which is another discussion why that number. But the point is that it does reveal something from a deeper dimension. So it's true, other juices reveal things, but this particular one has this particular power, which is the power of wine. With that, let us move to the essays. So 3 essays. As we go down the list from the top winners to the ones that are almost top winners. So the first one is by not just a problem solver, by Moshe Coltman, 20 years old, a Holoteda, Brooklyn, New York. Begins with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's famous statement on his deathbed: there lies 2 roads before me, and I do not know which one they will take me. And he goes on to explain, but basically as an opening for his essay, which is that to address the issue that there are innate aspects within Chassidus that can provide us with a wide range of tools to refine and better ourselves. Chassidus can truly help someone to overcome issues and ultimately assist in living toward a meaningful life. And he goes on to explain in this particular essay how that's done. And essentially uses a few points here. The point of bittul, the element of bittul. So he says this essay will discuss how through 4 steps: recognition, being aware, yigia, toil and effort, which is through hishkashus, through connecting, and bittul, as I just mentioned. I'm sorry, 4 steps. Did I say 3? 4 steps. Recognition, yigia, bittul, and hafotza, spreading out. One can achieve and internalize what Chassidus demands of all of us. And very, very, very creative and original way goes through these 4 steps, bringing plenty of sources of how one travels. First, recognition, meaning you need to be aware and conscious, and can't just live a life of a blind indirection, I should say. And because when you're living in the darkness, you can't even know what the problem is. Using, of course, the parable from the Mittler Rebbe. Then he goes through Yegia and his kashrus, the connection to a tzaddik, to a Rebbe, and the connection to Moshe Rabbeinu. And then, as I said, third thing is bittul, nullification, how a person completely dedicates themselves to something greater than themselves. And then hafotza, spreading out, meaning reaching out not just internally, but reaching out. Those are the 4 methods that really are key to living a healthier life. Well done essay. And like all essays, can be seen at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And there you have the essays of this year, 2017, and the essays of the last 2 years. The next essay is sorry about that. From Hardship to Happiness by Chani Volovic, age 34 years old, Long Beach, California. We live in a world where tragedies occur regularly, both to us individually and in the world at large. Poverty, crime, and crisis are a sad reality. In our personal lives, we deal with numerous challenges, including financial struggles, relationship, and family issues. Simultaneously, and naturally so, we are constantly striving to achieve happiness. The question is, how do we do this? The following essay will employ a few signature Chassidic teachings to accomplish the above, such as trach gut v'zayin gut, think good and it'll be good, and moyach shalat alev, the mind rules the heart. And goes on to dissect the issues of challenges in life and how we see the good, how we can see the deeper good and God's blessings within it. And also comes up with a whole multi-step process, beginning with awareness. Number 2, asking God for help, which is prayer. Number 3, trach gut v'zayin gut, positive thinking. And those 3 steps, she concludes, what I hope to leave my readers with is that the betachon and the Chassidus-based path to positive thinking is a successful approach toward creating the meaningful life we all strive for. It helps create a situation where our moyach, our mind, rules our heart, which in turn creates a life rich with inner peace, conscious joy, and revealed blessings. Well annotated and well done as well. So thank you for that. And finally, we go to the 3rd essay, which is a Hebrew essay called Chinuch Nesinas HaKeach La'Achrayus, loosely translated, building competent, responsible children as a teacher. Basically, chinuch being of giving people responsibility, empowering people with responsibility. And in a very fascinating way compares it, contrasts to the objectives of education in the secular world, and how Chassidus, and even in the Jewish world, and how Chassidus changes the whole perspective, that the bottom line in education is take responsibility for yourself. Influence your surroundings. Do everything in your power. And this essay By Dov Halpern, I should mention. Dov Halpern, age 38 years old, Yeshivas Tem Chetvim, Elad, Israel. In this essay, he says that I will explain 3 steps that are necessary to cause a student, a worker, a faculty member, a person in business, and actually every person, 3 steps to achieve this empowerment that's necessary in taking responsibility. And the 3 steps are the first, and he uses 3 steps are, number 1 is chibur hergoshida, a sense of connection to the cause at hand, and says that we can learn lessons from that from Moshe Rabbeinu. The second is a second step is a call to action, to act on it, which is we learn lessons from Mordechai. And the third is the influence to take responsibility and deal with challenges. And there he takes lessons from the Rebbe. So he uses 3 personalities in history, Moshe, Mordechai, and the Rebbe, to talk about 3 steps of how a person is educated and the purpose of education, not just the acquisition of knowledge, not just even training how to do things, but actually to become a productive, responsible person to fulfill the mission in this life. And does so in very elaborate fashion, not short, but thorough, and again, very good essay. And with that, we conclude the essays. And again, the essays you can see online at meaningfullife.com/MyLife, where all the essays are there, as well as previous essays. And if you also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, we send out the new essays that we publish on a weekly basis. So let me wish everyone, it should be a very freiliche Chodesh Taamuz, like I said, Yehovchi Yomil, Sasna Simcha L'Meidim Tevim, the entire month, as Yud-Beis Taamuz indicated and proved 90 years ago. It took the direst of situations to transform it into a Geula. That Geula shall lead to the Geula Mitzvah Shlema. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. MyLife Chassidus Applied. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 167. Look forward to share more next week, Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a very blessed week and a freilichen Chodesh.